Call to order. This is Rules and Open Government Committee meeting for June 5th, 2013. A couple of agenda order items. Item G5 is going to be dropped. That's the grant agreement item. Item G6, workforce management. Councilor Rocha has requested a one-week deferral because he's ill today. Any other changes to the agenda? 7 and 8, I think we should talk about. Those are referrals from the Elections Commission. Talk about that. I anticipate not taking action, but I would like to talk about them. Okay. Any other changes to the agenda? Then we'll move to the June 10th special evening meeting with one agenda item on it. Anything to talk about with regard to that? That is the special meeting for the public hearing on the proposed operating and capital budgets and proposed departmental fees and charges, which we're going to vote on the 11th. Anything new on that one?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve.
That'd be a second.
Mr. Wall, you want to speak?
Sir, in those documents, on the budget documents, I have failed to see tax revenue that is lost by the city over affordable housing projects, not paying property taxes and recompensation from the county tax rolls. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion to approve this special meeting agenda. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's approved. So let's look at Tuesday's June 11th agenda. Anything on page 1? 9 a.m. start still looks like what we need, I think.
Yes.
Page 2 or 3, anything to talk about? How about page 4 or 5? Page 6 or 7? We've got a note that some of these matters are going to be heard immediately following the ceremonial. That's 3.6, 3.7, 3.8. That's the library parcel tax rates, community water system rates, and June budget message, capital budgets. So why do we need to have the rate increases heard first? Are they just in that sequence?
Those rates are assumed in the budget that's going to be adopted.
Okay.
Even though they don't change.
So in terms of the meeting, we'll take those in order, 3.6, 3.7, and then the budget message, and then the fees and charges. That's the appropriate order for the hearing. All right, anything else on page 6 or 7? How about page 8 or 9? Page 10 or 11? I have one request for an addition, presentation accommodation at Barcadero Realty by Councilor Licurdo. Any others? Mr. Wall, you want to speak on this one?
With reference to 3.3, the two-tier system for the police department, I think you should revisit that. I think you're endangering police officer safety with having a two-tier pay system. On item 3.7, municipal water rate increase for 2013-2014. Item 4.1, municipal water systems water supply assessment for Zanker Road materials recovery facility. And item 4.2, rezoning the real property located on the north side of Los Esteros Road may be consolidated because they may have some relationships, mainly by providing potable water to Zanker Road materials recovery facility, which is also part and parcel of the zero waste anaerobic energy facility, which is probably responsible for the reason why you want to increase the landfill capacity for the materials they can't turn into energy. One question that would, for the Treatment Plant Advisory Commission, is this muni water line going to bisect or go through a water pollution control plant land to facilitate the corporate entity Zenker Road materials recovery? That's an interesting issue in itself, but with reference to the rates, are the rates part and parcel to pay for this pipeline to Zenker Road materials recovery facility at the behest of the taxpayers? Because there's a lot of incentives and other breaks given to this operation that's occurring out there at taxpayer expense. So I would think that you could put 4.1 and 4.2 on the consent calendar because most people aren't going to understand it. And it's in keeping with most of what's going on this agenda by placing other fees and associated taxes upon the taxpayers. Thank you.
That concludes public testimony.
Motion
Any-
to approve with the addition?
Second.
A motion to approve with the addition. Changes as noted. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's approved. Let's turn to June 18th draft. Anything on page 1?
Closed session. And the question is, what time do you want to start, given both the length of the public agenda and a closed session?
Well, at least 9 o'clock, if not earlier. The question is whether or not starting earlier helps us. I want to make sure we get enough time for the closed session agenda, and so 9 to 12 for sure will be necessary. We have in the past started earlier and then just gone into the afternoon agenda in the morning. What I'd like to do, I think, is when we get to the end of the agenda and get a feel for the length of it, come back to that question, but at least at 9 o'clock. Because I think there will be highly likely enough closed session material that will take the full 3 hours, and I don't have any space in the afternoon to try to make it up.
We have the whole night.
We have the whole night? That's true. Anything on page 2 or 3? Page 4 or 5? Page 6 or 7? Richard, do you have the agenda from the 18th that I marked up this morning? I know it was pre-edits. Okay, never mind, because I had a note on there that I can't remember what it was. Anything else on page 6 or 7? Page 8 or 9? Page 10 or 11?
On item 2.38, on the edit sheet, we're asking to move this to section 3. We're anticipating discussion on that item.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. So 2.38,
I'm sorry.
2.
Oh, the numbers changed. The numbers changed. I'm sorry. The fleet management item. Did it already get moved?
Yeah, fleet management, I believe we already moved to the 3s.
My apologies. I didn't realize it had moved. So,
Okay, so
Yeah.
anything else on 10 or 11? How about page 12 or 13, which is the end of the consent calendar? Page 14 or 15. Just one question as we go through, are there any other items that we should just move to the consent calendar that aren't going to be likely to be discussed anyway? If we see those, we can mark those as we go through. Anything on 14 or 15? Page 16 or 17? Page 18 or 19. The temporary closure of Will Creek Drive, 4.1. Any reason to have a conversation about that?
I think it's noticed as a public hearing.
Okay.
It's a vehicle code issue.
Okay,
Also, I think that's in District 7, right?
I think so.
Yes. So it is. Thank you.
Okay, items 4.4, actions related to owner loss apartment projects, not to be heard before 1:30. That's if we get started earlier in the day.
I think the numbering on this is a little messed up. That note should have been associated with 4.3, which was noticed for 1:30,
Oh.
not with 4.4.
Oh, so the public hearings on the business improvement district
Yes.
reports not before 1:30? Okay.
As well as 4.5 was noticed for 1:30.
And that's a reorganization of territory, so that's got the note in the right spot? Okay, anything else on 18, 19? How about 20, 21?
On 5.1, the Neighborhoods Commission, we do have amended language that's on a separate sheet for the recommended action.
So the motion needs to reference the amended language? and then
Yes, please, thank you.
practice.
Anything else on 20 or 21? Page 22 or 23? '24 or 25? Should 8.1, actions related to California identification system, go on a consent calendar? Is that-
It's the pleasure of the committee.
Yeah.
Certainly.
We're just carrying out
Yes.
what's already been decided by the people who need to decide these things, namely the chiefs. Anything else on 24 or 25? How about 26 or 27, which are the land use items on the evening agenda? Or page 29, which is City Council, Dearborn Development Authority, Successor Agency, joint meeting item. I have some requests for additions. We need the change language on the Neighborhoods Commission pilot, I think, is the only thing that's different from the printed agenda. And then we should think about the length of the meeting and whether or not there are some things that are likely to go into the evening or late in the day, or do we take a dinner break? How late will we work before we take a break and come
Mayor, I
back?
find that there's so many different items on this, it's sort of hard to predict. I would just suggest we start the meeting and when it ends, You know, and if we want to do a break at 6:30 to
We'll
7.
decide if we're hungry enough that we'll have to take a break. We took
I think
half our
any-
dinner break last
Any
night.
attempt doing time certains will just go nowhere.
Yeah. I think, half-hour dinner break, if we're getting close, would be fine. If we got hours to go, we could take a full hour for dinner break, and we'll just decide that in the afternoon. Back to the question of when to start the meeting. I'm pretty sure that closed session is going to take 3 hours if we have, I guess if we think we might somehow not have any labor items on the 18th, then it's possible that we could get done with closed session before noon, and would it be worthwhile to start the meeting earlier? But I think the odds of us getting done a lot before noon are pretty low.
Mayor?
Yeah.
I would just assume that, that if we had a traditional starting format of 1:30 in the evening session, it would just be a long Tuesday, day and night, but we would complete it. But I don't think it's, I think I've seen worse final June agendas than this.
Yes, and I think
I
this
didn't mean
one,
to say worse,
this one-
longer.
this one approximates last year's June 18th or equivalent
Yeah,
agenda.
I don't want to jinx it, but I don't think there was anything in here that's going to bring out a lot of
a lot of
huge
people, just
crowd.
the sheer volume of items. So I think we're okay with just keeping the 9 o'clock start and a 1:30 start for the rest of the agenda, and then going through until we get done. If we get delayed, we can take a dinner break. Anything else to discuss on this? Mr. Wall, you want to speak?
Sir, it's interesting to note that 2.22 and 2.25, Tucker Construction has two projects, one at water pollution control, one dealing with homeless encampments, $550,000 for vagrants causing problems. Vagrants ought to be cleaning up their own encampments. The heck with taxpayer money coming into this. Also, you see 2.27, the water district cleanup. You're going to take housing money, City of San Jose housing money, to clean up the water district's problem along the creeks. That's another issue. 3.9, the sewer service and use charge. I assert the dictates of Proposition 218 with reference to my sewer rates at my house. I don't want to just be on an estimate. 3.12, Mr. Mayor, is a little comedy here. The hiring referral fee, which we'll discuss later in item G, this is a direct and approximate cause of Measure B. This hasn't been seen for well over a decade, possibly 2 decades, in which the city has hiring referral fees from employees to bring in other people to work for the city because, well, the city can't hire people. Now also, we note 42 items minimum on the consent calendar, and this I will address to Mr. Attorney. I have repeatedly said that when they load these items up on the consent calendar and then treat the consent calendar as one item, is actionable at federal district court because it precludes the citizen from properly redressing government, because there's tens of millions of dollars here on the consent calendar, whereupon you can only get 2 minutes for the entire consent calendar. And this is not reasonable. This also goes to the issue of council giving themselves extra vacation days because of how they fall before a council meeting or holidays before a council meeting, and council just doesn't get their job done. But with reference to free speech or the chilling and throttling thereof,
Sorry, time is up.
then throttled.
Any other comments, changes, corrections, additions? We'll be back next week to make the final edits, obviously, to that meeting. Is there a motion?
To approve the agenda with the related updated comments on 5.1. Is that it? Did I say something else?
I think that's it.
That's it, second.
Motion is approved with the changes as discussed, including the changed language on the agenda, item 5.1. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's what we'll do. We have nothing to review under study sessions, nothing under legislative update, meeting schedules, the public record. Any committee would like to pull for discussion on the public record? Mr. Wall, you want to speak?
Sir, with reference to item A, affordable housing does not pay property taxes. I want the same deal. Now, this is another issue that's going to crop up later in today's soiree, if not in future incidents. If affordable housing projects do not pay property taxes, and by city ordinance they're inclusionary, that means that they could come into my neighborhood, I want the same deal. I don't want to pay property taxes, to be honest with you. And if these projects don't have to pay property taxes, then I wonder how this passes constitutional muster under the 14th Amendment, I mean, with the equal protection under the law and all. With item B, mobile home parks residents are getting no help from City Hall. The memorandum speaks for itself. I mean, we have learned orator time and time again at rules speaking about the shenanigans pulled by unscrupulous mobile home park owners. And if they're skirting rent control laws, then you have an affirmative duty to put pressure on them. In addition, because of your progressive attitude, which people like, and that's fine, you should be reformulating all fees and costs to these mobile home renters or rent control people that are covered by rent control to include sewer service and use charge increases, garbage increases, property tax increases, because these are all pass-through fees that go from the property owner to the mobile home resident. Now, I'm not a communist here, but you're the folks that have already enacted rent control as a form of affordable housing, and that's fine, that's established. But don't piecemeal and don't run people into a pile of fresh bovine manure over this issue, because this is real money to these folks, and most of them are on fixed income. Thank you.
Representative O'Connell?
I would be saying the same thing if I was up for appointment to a commission. A number of years ago, I applied for a city commission, and I was stunned when I did not get the appointment because my qualifications were, quite frankly, heads and shoulders above anyone else's. And when I had my meeting with the council person and asked he, she, why I wasn't appointed, he, she responded that he, she had not looked at my application, even looked at it, because the other person had been recommended by someone he, she knew. Later on, the person who was appointed acknowledged that, wondered why they'd been appointed when I was so much more qualified. I have a real concern that candidates are not getting the level playing field of an interview. I liked what you did yesterday when you interviewed those candidates. Obviously, we couldn't do that for every commission before the council, but I am very distraught that two women from underrepresented groups that I personally recruited aren't even going to get an interview. All they are is names on a sheet of paper. And so I respectfully request that the consolidation, which I have stood here year after year and supported, not deny candidates in interviews. So please, when you're making appointments, interview these folks and go out of the box and don't appoint somebody just because you know them. Thank you.
That includes the testimony on the public record. Any committee wants to pull for further discussion?
Motion to note and file.
Got a motion to note and file public record. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's approved. We have nothing under boards, commissions, and committees work plans category, so let's turn to other items. We have two matters for city-sponsored special event, the Portuguese flag raising ceremony.
Second.
And the Philippines flag raising. Motion is to approve both. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's approved. We have a recommendation from Councilmembers Camas, Campos, Calderon-Rocha to add a work plan item to the Transportation Environment Committee to include some work regarding copper materials seller registration. Hans Larson, you want to speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the Rules Committee, Hans Larson, Director of Transportation. I just wanted to provide the committee with staff's perspectives on this particular referral. First, we appreciate the memo and certainly the intent of the effort to try to reduce theft of copper wire that is plaguing city facilities, parks, and street lights. I think the memo highlights the significance of the issue. We had over 400 incidents of theft, valued at over $1 million to try to replace it. We have worked as a staff team to try to address this, research the topic, what are other agencies doing about it, and have taken actions to try to defer the theft. Our general conclusion is the most effective thing that we can do really relies in being able to take some kind of enforcement action to prosecute, to identify, prosecute those that are involved with the stolen copper wire. We have talked to the police chief about this, and as the council knows, this is sort of a very challenging issue to fit into sort of other kind of work priorities and important public safety needs that the police department is dealing with. I want to add also, the memo kind of refers to, are there some things that we can do from a regulatory perspective? State law that's on the books now is pretty strict in terms of regulations. There was a Assembly Bill 844 approved in 2008 that puts forward some very strict requirements for recycling facilities that accept copper, and basically what they're required to do is get the seller's photo ID, identify what they are selling, and get their thumbprint, and then they can't receive money for it until 3 days after they've delivered the materials. And they're required to keep written records of everything that they have. And enforcement on the topic is through the local police department. And then there's penalties for violations. So I think kind of where we are as staff as we report in the budget process, we're somewhat resigned without kind of significant ability to enforce the issue, resigned to just replace it. And so we put money in the budget to be able to deal with it, particularly for street lights. So with that as a background, sort of offer a couple of alternatives. One is, as recommended, we can take it forward to the T&E committee or perhaps public safety and strategic support and have a further discussion. I'm not sure there's more, that we can add other than what I've, provided to you as a summary. The other option would be to just hold the item until we're at a point where realistically we could have the resources available to devote to some kind of enforcement. So I wanted to provide you that perspective and happy to take any questions.
Questions? Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Hans. And so, if I understand correctly, there is really, the only way to somewhat resolve this issue is through enforcement actions, and we don't really have all the tools or the resources to do that, or at least to the extent that we want to. Is that right?
That's the collective sense of staff as we've looked through this and struggled with ways to try to address this the best that we can. We've had, there was an info memo that we put out, I think a year or so ago on it, where we indicated in the past where we had an increase in wire theft. There was an effective action the police department led with a sting operation that largely addressed the issue. That was probably about a decade ago, and we've raised it with the police department whether this rises to a level of significance with other issues they have if they could do it, and in the police chief's opinion, they couldn't see the ability to do that in the current time frame.
So even if we add more regulations or regulatory policies to what we currently have right now, if we don't have the necessary enforcement actions, that we can't really resolve the issues.
That's our sense, and I think even with the recycling facilities that are operating legally as a legitimate business, our sense is that there's a large black market in operation that is involved with the stealing and the processing of the copper wires. So even if we regulate the existing businesses, we're not sure it really gets at the majority of what's actually going on today.
So here's my concern. If we take this to the Transportation Environmental Committee and conduct this presentation, which will obviously educate the public in regards to our current policy, but at the same time, I think that inadvertently we could tell folks who are conducting these kind of illegal actions that we don't have the enforcement to go out there and enforce this, so it's free for all. So indirectly, we could be encouraging more people to go around and steal copper wire. So that's that's how I look at this. Just the same message that we gave, or not the city, but inadvertently, a year ago when we said we don't have enough enforcement from the police department to go out there and really deal and address issues that revolve around burglaries or robberies, and that's perhaps people think that, okay, well, if the police officer's not going to come within a couple hours, then it gives me incentive to go and rob people. So that's my concern. I think that it's probably add more value if you just send the council a memo, really just articulating the existing regulations, what we have in place. But I don't think a presentation is necessary. It could add value, but I think that inadvertently or indirectly we could, egg people on in regards to doing the things that they shouldn't be doing, which is going around and stealing copper wire. So I think that until we have the necessary resources to really enforce this in a way that's beneficial, we can certainly table this and maybe come back at another time and really address the enforcement issues rather than the regulations.
Where's the money coming from to pay for the copper wire that we have to replace?
We added as a budget add, so we've twice gone back to council, I think it was mid-year actions to get funds from the traffic capital program to replace stolen streetlight wire. And then this current budget has money in the next 2 years in the amount of $250,000 each year to continue to, work to replace it in a timely manner. So a traffic capital improvement program.
Is there any source of funding that we could use besides the general fund that we could have some specific enforcement actions just focused on this problem, either in the form of sting operations or however you might stake out these sites or anything else that people might do if we had the resources? So the question is, is the only source of money for that the general fund?
We have, I think within the traffic capital program, we have some monies that are restricted, some of them are more general purpose. They're, from my perspective, if, the money that we're putting towards replacement, if it could be better put towards an enforcement action, I think that might be worthwhile doing. Again, sort of the feedback we've gotten from our partners in police department is not really, they're challenged as the mayor and council know, with just a lot of other things on their plate, and it's not even so much a money issue, but just having the resources. But I think, that's a valid policy discussion for the committee and council to have.
Well, copper wire theft is never going to be equivalent to responding to 911 calls in the police department. And it's going to be some years, I think, before the police department's staffed well enough that we can begin to allocate resources to some kinds of things. But I do know that we had a very successful sting operation a few years ago around copper wire that put some people out of commission. So what I would like to know is for you to think about whether or not there's a source of funding or some other way to develop the investigation that we could fund outside of the police department budget in a way that we could focus on this. Because unless you get some dedicated funds for that, it's never going to be quite high enough priority to really do anything about except replace the wire, and that's costing us $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And the other question I had is whether or not any other cities have had any more success than we have at dealing with it, either in an enforcement matter or some other matter. It's already against the law, so regulations aren't going to much deal with that. But there is an area of regulation that might be interesting, and that is on the receiving end of the people that are buying stolen copper wire, et cetera.
Yes, and it's kind of referred to the state laws regarding that. So the receiving of recycled copper materials, there's very strict regulations, in my opinion, in terms of how they're received. So you need to, the identity of the person that's selling it, photo ID, fingerprint, and then they don't get paid immediately. There's a 3-day waiting period in order to receive money for it. And then the seller or the one that's buying the recycled copper has to keep records for 2 years of all of their transactions. So it seems to be, a pretty strict set of kind of regulations on the market in terms of legitimate, copper wire recycling.
Well, why is it so hard to catch the people who are selling?
Yeah, I think just kind of anecdotally, it's a sense that it's not going through the legitimate recyclers, that it's getting processed through black market. So I think, Mr. Mayor, your questions about whether other jurisdictions have done, there was some media coverage in terms of some actions Vallejo had done as part of a sting operations where they were able to put sort of tracers within the insulation of the wire, and they were able to catch some folks in doing it. What we hear anecdotally is you know, the folks involved with this are aware of it, and now they pull out the wire, immediately strip it.
It catches on.
Or, you know, staying a step ahead of the, you know, the enforcement efforts. You know, we've talked with Caltrans. They're struggling with the same issue. We've had conversations with the city of Fremont, Gilroy, other jurisdictions, and, you know, I think one of them, some of the other jurisdictions have contractors doing their replacement, and they're actually paying very high wages in order to replace it, much more than it's currently costing us to, where we replace the work with primarily city resources.
Well, if we had resources for enforcement, what would we do?
Yeah, I think just based on the past success is really some kind of sting operation where you kind of infiltrate the community that's involved with this, and you publicize the heck out of it that either we're doing it or we, you know, if you capture some folks, and that sort of becomes, I think, the best deterrent, that they'll move to other places where they, you know, run into, you know, a lesser amount of enforcement or resistance.
Or they'll steal it here and sell it there. I have one request to speak. Might as well take that now. Mr. Wall?
Sir, you've been in public office long enough to remember the shopping cart entitlement report, a weekly publication. You might want to ask Mr. Tom Morris to find out exactly how many of them were written, single individual letters, about these recycle places up on North 10th Street around Horning. Sir, you'll remember also that I presented photographs of people using stolen shopping carts transporting all sorts of materials, one including a city signpost, complete with a galvanized post and city sign. These recycle places, in my opinion, from my experience, are nothing more than the epitome of a black market operation, primarily subsidized by the city of San Jose's acquiescence and not precluding the stealing of shopping carts, because that is one mode of transport of stolen materials to these recycleries. I've seen copper wire stripped completely clean in multiple shopping carts coming into two facilities. I've had a routine, my exploits on North 10th at Horning are nothing short of legend when you see the number of individual letters to you. Now, a source of funding could be is that you go utilize existing codes, municipal codes, to go after shopping carts within different supermarkets or stores or what have you, because that's already on the books. All you have to do is start finding them and use that money to fund your sting operation. Then you start getting rid of a whole host of ancillary crimes that the City of San Jose Council, through its acquiescence, perpetuates. And that's the stealing of recycled materials in neighborhoods in the downtown on a vast scale. And this includes the use of pickup trucks that I've seen at these recycleries too. So, Mr. Mayor, there's a lot of things that you can do to take a bite out of crime, but you folks should just make a joke out of it. Oh, we don't have resources for police. Well, you caused that problem, all right? And all these ancillary problems that the city faces. Now, ask Mr. Morris.
Your time is up. What would the committee like to do? We're going to be dealing with work plans for all of the committees. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sarah Wright, Council Aide for Councilmember Johnny Camus. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this item, and we've discussed this with the Department of Transportation, Police Department, and Public Works, and we do feel that there would be a great benefit in discussing this at the Transportation and Environment Committee. From our discussions, especially with the Police Department, they do feel, we spoke with the Financial Crimes Unit, and they feel that there would be some use in implementing additional regulations with regards to this, as far as some of the ideas that we discussed that some other cities have done are seller permits, where you would have to have a permit and register with the city in order to sell, and so we would have your information, your photo. You would have to show this permit in order to sell copper wire, and then, of course, on the recycler side, in addition to documenting, they would also, one of the things that the police department wanted to require them to do would be to submit to the police department a record of everything that they've received, so then that would make it a little easier for them instead of having to seek it out. having it come to them, and then they would know from which recyclers they're not receiving information from, so then they can go from there. Those are just some of the things that we were discussing, and the police department staff that I spoke to did see some value in this, and that's why I think at least a discussion would be beneficial at the committee or another venue if that's more appropriate. But and as far as the concern as to broadcasting that this is an issue, that we're low on resources, I think just judging by the numbers, it's pretty clear that it's already a problem, and I don't think that discussing it would really cause more of a problem than there already is. The hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage and repair, and so many hundreds of sites that have been hit. It seems like it would be saying that we are letting it happen if we don't discuss this, and I think that would be that it would be good to at least have a discussion at the committee, and then we can go over some of the ideas. And one of the other things they were talking about was a sting operation. Clearly, we don't have the resources to do that completely on our own, but coordinating with other cities and agencies is an option that the police department brought up to us, possibly the sheriff's office. If it were a joint effort, then I think it would be much more feasible, possibly more effective, and then getting the other cities involved and coordinating with them on regulations so that they would go just from San Jose to another city. I think that would be worth exploring.
Okay, anything else on it? We're going to do the work plan for the next 6 months, sometimes in the next month. We're working on that now, so I wouldn't want to put this on that work plan until we see what the work plan is, and let the chair of the committee have a chance and the staff have a chance to look at the work plan for that committee. Whether or not transportation environment is the appropriate place or not is one of the questions, but just how it fits in the work plan is the other one. And I could see having the discussion item A at a committee, but whether or not to get into regulations or coordinating or anything like that, I think I wouldn't give that direction at this point. But I think maybe we ought to just refer this to the chair of the committee and the staff to look at it, how it might fit into the work plan that's yet to be finalized, as I understand it.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, members of the committee, as the staff now to the T&E committee, I'd be more than happy to take a look at that, work with the chair, and see how this fits.
Okay, and then all of the work plans will be coming back to us in early August, I think.
Right,
Yes.
early August.
Yeah. Okay, anything else on this? Any motion?
I'd just say, no, I mean, it's pretty clear that things are stolen globally, and metal theft and catalytic converters, especially United States, and even solar, is being heisted everywhere. And I think there is a level of, what is it that we can do? And I think an informational memo, I think even before that, telling council about the state law, because I think most people don't know of having a thumbprint driver's license, waiting days to be paid. And we're not the only state that's passed this law, and then other states have even gone further to make it a felony to have a certain amount of copper, and have made it a felony to even resell a catalytic converter, which is related to this, because we're talking about, I think David Wall would probably characterize the word deviancy. So I think that's certainly a dilemma that we have to deal with, but I would look forward to seeing how they would want to prioritize the committee work for the coming year.
Okay, is that a motion?
I believe the motion is to have it come back with their workload assessment. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah, second.
Refer to the committee chair.
Just for clarification, work plans with the committee work plans as opposed to a standalone workload assessment? I think the...
Yeah, just part of the committee work plan.
Good. And referral also to staff to do an info memo on the state of the current law, as well as the problem.
Yeah, I think that would be useful so councilors know what the law is. Could be helpful.
Yeah, and I would just suggest that it lays out the problem as it states, nationally, with the dilemma and what other states have done, and what our state has done. And because I think for many time that, again, outside of what the state has done, many San Jose residents will have said you should identify who these people are that are selling it. Well, actually, that's already part of the process. Now, question on the folks that are receiving, couldn't we just simply ask them to send the log? And I don't know if it necessarily has to be received by a sworn officer to read the log, and then you would figure out who does or does not. Because if it's already let me ask you this, Hans. Who is the regulatory body then? Is it the city that has the jurisdiction where that reseller resides, or is it a state agency that checks the log of who is buying, or pardon me, who's selling?
So, yeah, I reviewed the legislation, and the kind of enforcement and review of the written records lies with the police department of the local jurisdiction. So if it's unincorporated, it's the county sheriff. If it's a city, it's the chief of police or their designee.
So my guess is without an incredible amount of manpower, a letter could be sent to everyone that's in this saying, we would like to see your log and please mail us a copy in 30 days. It wouldn't have to require.
We'd have to look at the legislation to see how and when those records are to be made available. Can you just do a blanket request, or do you have to do specific requests? And then to the extent we can go beyond that, it's really a question of how the state law is written, if it's intended to preempt, or can the city have its own regulations. So that's just something I'm not familiar with,
Sure.
and we'd have to review it.
May I request that be, if it's okay for the Rules Committee, that be part of the info memo to collaborate with the city attorney's office so we know how you get this log that's under state law? Yeah.
Okay, that's part of the motion?
Yes.
That's part of the referral. On that motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. That's approved. Item G6, I'm sorry, that was deferred for a week. Item G7, referrals. Previous referrals to the Election Commission with recommendations coming back. And G8, the Election Commission recommendations on administrative procedures, et cetera, two separate sets of recommendations. I'd like to talk about these today, but I'm not prepared to take action on them today. And when we get done, I want to think about how they fit into the biennial ethics review, which I've got to do. Since this is the odd year, I've got to do that, and moving these and that forward to the council at the same time. And also how we can sort this out so they don't end up having a 3-hour council discussion on it. So maybe do some additional work here at the Rules Committee before it moves on. But I would like to hear, I know there are a couple of people here that want to speak on it. I'd like to hear from the folks from the Elections Commission if they want to speak. So let's take them in no particular order. Gloria Chun-Hu wants to speak, and David Wall wants to speak. Let's take the testimony first.
Members of the Rules Committee, and I'm Gloria Chun-Hu, representing the League of Women Voters. I spoke to the Elections Commission as it was reviewing its list of many revisions it was considering, and actually, for the most part, we're glad for most of the revisions. I did speak out on raising some grave concerns and urging the committee not to suspend the expenditure limits. We're all concerned, in fact, it is a statewide, if not a national topic in the League about the money in politics. We feel, however, that it would weaken our democratic institutions if we allow more and more money to come in. And this will be moving in the wrong direction to remove the limits. We feel strongly that disclosure laws are the way to go, that the requirement of transparency and public knowledge about where the money is coming from is the thing to do, but raising the limit would hardly do that, and would not do the combating of corruption and undue influence that we know money does provide in politics. So we encourage you to go with the commission's recommendation not to increase the cap on spending. Thank you.
Mayor,
Okay.
question for Gloria. Gloria, so then, we're dealing in the reality of where independent expenditures that, really don't have to disclose as well as an actual campaign does. And they're spending much higher proportional amount of money on that.
Right. There are, however...
I'm sorry. So my question is to you then, do you buy the argument of fairness that with a candidate's money they raise, it's all disclosed, 100% where it comes from, and this allows to, sort of keep up with these outside forces that are spending a tremendous amount?
There are 4 bills currently in the state legislature, all of which the League is following and supporting, all of which call for even tougher and wider disclosure bills. In fact, Ann Rabel, our chair of the California State Fair Political Practices Commission, not only spoke to our state convention, which, by the way, was here in San Jose. We're pleased to host them as a local league. But she also spoke to the Santa Clara County leagues. There are 5 leagues in our county about this whole issue. And we feel strongly that there continues to be wide interest in this, and the way that the league is moving toward, for example, is really to push for disclosure. And when that is, people know where the money is coming from, it actually has a great effect.
Understood, so it's a state priority and disclosure. Thank you. I just want to know where the league stood on this item clearly, because in void of state law, there's a little bit of a vacuum right now, and so thank you.
We agree.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Does anybody know what SB 52 is? That was the one mentioned in the memorandum regarding the state action that would remedy the issue?
I've read it, but I can't remember the details.
Ms. Hu mentioned 4 of them, and I'm not familiar with SB 42 or what they're doing.
The SB 52 was the only one that I had read. I haven't read the other ones that she referenced, but I can't remember the details of it.
And then for the city attorney, one of the issues I know there is with the voluntary expenditure limits is the scarlet letter of identifying candidates who have not agreed to voluntary expenditure limits and making a distinction between the 2 candidates. We already made some changes to adjust to where the law has changed.
Right.
What's left here that we have to worry about?
In terms of the voluntary expenditure limits, I think what we had initially recommended was that the other than the letter, other than people going on record as either agreeing to them or not agreeing to them, there was really little else impact that could be, because there's no way of otherwise enforcing the voluntary expenditure limit.
And the only benefit currently is to get a diamond designation on the sample ballot. In the past, if you signed the voluntary expenditure limit, you could then take larger contributions, but that provision is out. Right now, the only benefit is that diamond.
So you get the gold star if you agree to it.
I don't know if it's gold.
No, it's the same color as everything else.
So the question then is that little bit of incentive questionable under the more recent campaign finance laws about disadvantaging people who don't agree to expenditure limits? Because that's why we had to change, under the same set of cases where we had to basically level out the contribution amounts.
But those are mandatory versus voluntary. I don't see that as a distinction. People have a choice in this one, and the noting, whether it be a diamond or the letter, is I think fairly modest in terms of, and not really something that puts anybody at an advantage or disadvantage.
And even the letter says, I think if you violate the terms, it's void. It doesn't have a penalty provision if they spend over. I know, yeah.
So it's really? Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's really more the political consequences that might result from the fact that you get a negative comment or editorial or something if you violate something that you've said that you would live by. But there really, unfortunately, in the law, there's very little you can do to put teeth into it.
But that goes to the expenditure limit. It does not go to the contribution limit.
Correct.
That's correct.
Because everybody is, under our provisions, are limited to the same contribution amount, whether or not they agree to the expenditure limit.
Right.
Right.
Mr. Wall, you want to speak on these?
Sir, with reference to number 7, I think we haven't heard from our good friends Pat and Boggs in a long time. And I think that you should really be using our good friends back there in D.C. to put pressure on Citizens United with our elected people. And really, let's bring that issue to the forefront. With reference to the next mayor's race coming up and the voluntary spending limits, there's at least one candidate I know of that is signed that this person will not accept voluntary spending limits. Now, of course, you have to wonder if the person's going to win the Powerball and have all sorts of fun with television, but that's another issue for another day. On item 8, the Election Commission Title 12 revisions, don't like this increase in number of required signatures. If anything, to spur democracy, you want to have more participants in these races. And I think you should just allow what the county had, which, 20 signatures for a county seat versus a proposed 75 signatures for a city council seat. I think that that's a little bit burdensome and oppressive on those that are out there running for office. Thank you.
That concludes public testimony on this. What I would like to do, I think, is to bring this back next week so we can have a little further discussion. I'm going to study some of these and think about them, but certainly don't want to put it on the council agenda on the 18th of June.
Right.
Not a good time for having a discussion if there's going to be a council discussion. So sometime in August, and it's my intention to get out my recommendations on the biennial ethics review in the same time frame. So I think they could all go to the council at the same time, sometime in August.
August would work. We need to have the final reading no later than October 29th to have it in effect for the next campaign season.
Right, because you want, whatever changes are made, you want to have them before the fundraising season
Yes.
starts? Okay. Any objections to bring this back next week from the committee? Okay, we'll just carry this on, bring it back next week to try to see if there's anything else that needs to be done before it goes to the council.
The chair of the Elections Commission is present today, and I don't know if you want to hear him. He may not be here next
I'd
week.
be happy to have him here speak if you wanted to speak. Come on, I don't have a card for you.
I wasn't planning on saying anything today, but a couple of points I'll address. First of all, relative to Mr. Wall's comment, we're not suggesting that the number of required signatures be increased. What we're suggesting is that the form allow more signatures so that people don't have to go back with supplemental forms if some of the signatures are disallowed. The other point is I'm really concerned about item number 7, the referrals. I'm not as worried about timing on that, but number 8, our recommendations for possible changes. I'm concerned about that getting deferred too far, particularly the idea that it goes to council in August. After whatever happens, we have to go with the city attorney's office, write some ordinances. And that's going to take some time, and all that has to be in place by December. Our hope was, now obviously this isn't for us to decide, but our hope was that we could get feedback from rules on our recommendations. We could go back and do our work without going to council, and then come back to council through rules if necessary with the ordinances themselves. But in any way, the big concern is that anything, any ordinances, anything has got to be done before, what is it, December?
Yeah, August 29th is the last date in order, because it's a 30-day wait after an ordinance passes, so October 29th would be the final reading. November 30th would be the date it would be enacted, and then it'll be ready for December.
So if we get feedback from council in August on these recommendations, there's no, I think it's very unlikely that we would get ordinances
I think
done.
the campaign period begins early December.
December 7th.
And so working essentially 45 days back from that would be the first reading of the ordinance. So you're looking at, mid-October at the latest to actually have the council adopt an ordinance. So your working period would be somewhere between August and early October.
And the big crunch would be your staff.
Yeah. I mean, we essentially have a month, maybe a little bit more, to get something out and sunshined for review.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my concern.
Well, one of the things we could do next week is to figure out what things we think ought to move in the ordinance, because there's no reason why we couldn't have a draft ordinance in front of the council in August when we take it up. So that really becomes the possibility of a first reading. Of course, if you haven't been to the council, it's awfully hard to guess everything, but most of it could be ready.
Sometimes it's tougher to get something done in July than in August, September. So
Right.
I'm just throwing that out as a possibility.
Well,
September might be better.
Well, if we could get feedback from, you meet next Wednesday, coincidentally, we meet next Wednesday evening. So if we could get some direction out of next Wednesday's Rules Committee meeting, then we could get some actions going that evening
Yeah.
as far as what we're actually going to do.
Okay, well, let's aspire to do that next week.
Thank you.
I don't know if we'll have the entire committee next week or not, but hopefully we'll have all four members will be here, and so we can give some feedback on that. It could and we'll figure out exactly how to move it forward. Mr. Wall, you had another comment on item G8, which we're considering at the same time. I think you covered it. Okay, and you'll probably be here next week? Okay.
I was thinking that.
So we'll take up items G7 and 8 next week. We'll just carry those on. I think that was it for the agenda, except for the open forum. Mr. Wall?
Sir, I know that you and the council are really good-hearted people. And with reference to the amount of murders that have been happening in this city, I think we got to take a look back at a playbook that retired Chief Chris Moore used. It's time to bring immigration customs enforcement back to San Jose, and I mean with a vengeance. The police, the FBI, all the police agencies have already identified these gang members, their command structure, especially those that are already incarcerated either in state or county levels. I think a data sort by immigration status would serve the community on a variety of plateaus. One, you'd send a definitive message that gang activity has consequences if you're an illegal alien. We will get you and deport you, but even more so, deport their entire families as a sign of deterrence. Make the families start to be accountable for their little gangbanger kids and whatnot, and hold them accountable. 14-year-old kids out there with guns. Their parents should be held accountable for this. And the entire family, for that matter, if they're illegal. Just get rid of them. And this will also send a definitive message through the illegal alien community that, hey, you're illegal to begin with. You start causing problems in our community of citizens, and we're going to get rid of you by any means possible under the law. And I think it's time to quit giving love and kisses to these people and start really coming down hard on taking their assets and putting them in some form of incarceration, and if they are illegal, put them on the next ship to places unknown. And it would be one addendum, it would be a caveat to this, is how you relocate people. I mean, you don't have to relocate them to their country of origin. You could relocate them, in theory, to any place the military has airspace.
So your time is up. Martha O'Connell?
When I was walking down Santa Clara to come to this meeting, I met a disabled gentleman in a motorized wheelchair, and he asked me where I was going, and I told him I was coming to this meeting. So he said, please carry this message. From 1:30 in the morning, this morning, till 7 o'clock in the morning, he could not get a taxi because he was in a motorized wheelchair. And I asked him what he did. He said, well, he called a couple of companies. They arrived. They said, there's no way we can take you. He called the police. And the police said, it isn't our job, and we can't help you, and we can't take you home. So bottom line, he was on the street from 1:30 until 7 a.m. until a van accessible taxi, I think he said, showed up. So I think this is not the kind of city we want. I also question if there's ADA issues involved. So maybe some of you folks can tell me what city department I should start trying to get this gentleman some help. Thank you.
That concludes the open forum, concludes our meeting. We're adjourned.